You know, there is this universally terrifying concept that I think we all grapple with at some point in our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's this idea of breaking cycles. Like, usually when we think about the institutions that govern our world, those ancient, unshakable pillars of society, right?
Like the ones that have just always been there.
Exactly. The organizations that have been around since before our grandparents were born, we operate under this quiet, comforting assumption that they are eternal.
Yeah, we think they're designed to last forever. It acts as this psychological safety net for us.
It totally does.
Because we assume that if a system has survived the test of time, it must possess some, infallible wisdom. We like to believe the guardians of our reality have everything under control.
Even if we don't really understand how they do it.
Exactly.
But then comes that psychological shock. The absolute panic when those supposedly unshakable pillars inevitably crumble and fall.
And they always do.
They always do. I was thinking about this, and it's like, imagine living in this massive, sprawling, multi-story house your whole life.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You trust the floors, you trust the walls, you never think twice about leaning your entire weight against them.
Right, it's your home.
Right. But then one day, you peel back the floorboards in the basement and you find out the foundations of your own house aren't made of stone, they're made of paper.
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying realization.
Yeah.
Because if the foundation is paper, a collapse isn't just possible, it's inevitable.
Yes.
It means everything you've built your understanding of the world upon is just incredibly vulnerable to a single spark.
And it begs an even darker question for you to think about. What happens when the people supposedly guarding the balance of the world, the ones keeping the house from falling down, are actually the ones pushing it off the edge? Welcome to the deep dive in the Onyx Codex. The prophecies have spilled into the streets, the watchers are broken, and tonight, the shadows of the city will change forever.
I get chills literally every time we explore this specific era of the city's history.
It's so intense.
It really is. Because what we are looking at today is the absolute dissolution of the ultimate secret society. We are witnessing the fall of the Keepers.
So to really get to the bottom of this for you, we need to lay out our mission for today. We've pulled together an incredible stack of sources.
We have translated fragments from the Onyx Codex, some really deep analyses of the writings of Albrecht, decrypted Keeper marginalia,
and even some old architectural blueprints of the city's oldest districts, which will make sense later.
Oh, that part is mind-blowing.
It really is. Our goal here isn't just to tell you a story about a thief in the night. We are going to dissect the anatomy of an institutional collapse. We want to understand the exact mechanics of a citywide magical failsafe.
And ultimately, we're going to wrestle with the philosophical paradox of absolute freedom. We have to view these events through a very specific analytical lens.
Right.
Because the Keepers weren't just a powerful faction, they were the architects of the city's reality. To understand how they fell, we have to look at the bureaucratic rot that blinded them.
I want to pull on that thread of blindness, actually, because it perfectly connects to the nightmare our protagonist, Garrett, just barely survived.
The Shalebridge Cradle.
Yes. In our last deep dive, you followed Garrett into the Cradle. And let's look at the theme of that place rather than just the plot. It wasn't just a haunted building.
No, it was a repository of trauma. The Cradle, an orphanage that became an insane asylum, achieved this, malevolent consciousness.
Which is horrifying.
It remembered its inhabitants and literally fed on their suffering. It trapped them in this horrific memory loop. Garrett didn't just have to sneak past physical threats.
He had to conceptually trick a sentient building into believing he was dead just to escape.
Exactly. It was a psychological meat grinder.
But the crucial thematic takeaway from the Cradle isn't just that it was terrifying. It's what Garrett found inside. He found the spirit of a murdered girl named Laurel.
Right.
And by freeing Laurel from that memory loop, Garrett inadvertently pulled the pin on a grenade that blew the entire political structure of the city wide open.
He shattered the disguise of the Hag.
Yes, which remains one of the most brilliant and terrifying reveals in these historical texts.
Because the Hag wasn't an external threat lurking in the woods, She wasn't hiding in the sewers.
No.
The Hag was Gamal, and Gamal was the translator for the Keeper Order. She sat right next to the interpreter, Kaduka.
Right at the very top of the most secretive, perceptive organization in existence. The audacity of her infiltration is what gets me.
Oh, it's staggering.
Gamal was an ancient, skin-stealing monster. She murdered the real Laurel, literally stole her skin, and used it to masquerade as this pale, eerie little girl.
And she used that disguise to operate right in front of the Keeper Council. She was manipulating their sacred texts, the glyph prophecies, from the inside out.
The irony there is just, well, it's incredible if you consider the foundational philosophy of the Keepers.
Right, because they are an organization dedicated to absolute observation. Their magic, their training, their whole purpose is to watch.
To perceive what others miss.
Exactly. They operate from the shadows to maintain the balance of power, subtly nudging events based on what they observe.
They pride themselves on being the all-seeing eye of the city. I mean, they literally brand their initiates with symbols of hidden knowledge.
Yet their institutional hubris was so monumental that they failed to notice an ancient, predatory monster sitting at their own council table.
It's wild.
We can analyze this as a failure bureaucracy over raw perception. The Keepers became so reliant on interpreting dusty prophecies, looking for grand external threats, that they stopped looking at reality.
They trusted the system implicitly.
Yeah, they became completely blind to the rot within it.
It's like a massive corporation that is so focused on quarterly projections, they don't realize their own CFO has been embezzling funds for 20 years.
That's a perfect analogy.
They were looking at the stars while the floorboards were rotting beneath them. But the moment Garrett frees Laurel's spirit, the magical bindings holding Gamal's disguise together just completely unraveled.
The stealthy, quiet manipulation ends instantly. The shadows vanish.
Gamal no longer needs to pretend to be the subservient translator. She drops all pretense, and the shift in her methodology is so violent.
It is immediate and brutal. The sources detail how Gamal attacks the Keepers, not with subtle assassinations, but with absolute unhinged rage.
She tears through their hidden sanctuaries. She actively destroys the Keeper compound, slaughtering members of the Order who, until 5 minutes ago, thought she was just a quiet little girl.
She leaves a trail of absolute carnage and flees to her underground lair.
And the location of that lair is highly symbolic, isn't it?
Oh, very. She retreats to the buried remains of the Library of Guardians. This is an ancient site located deep beneath the modern city's south quarter.
So she's down in this ancient, ruined library, having thrown off her human disguise, surrounded by the bodies of the Keepers she just slaughtered. What is she actually trying to achieve down there?
Well, she is trying to destroy a specific failsafe, known in the Keeper texts as the Final Glyph.
The Final Glyph.
Yes. Gamal has extended her life unnaturally for centuries. Some timelines suggest she has been operating since at least the year 1242.
Wow.
Yeah, but her immortality is flawed. It requires constant maintenance, skin stealing, and she is bound by the rules of glyph magic.
So she wants to break the rules.
Exactly. Her goal is to destroy the Final Glyph, which she believes will grant her true, unchecked, permanent immortality. She wants to rewrite the fundamental rules of reality so she can never be challenged again.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. If Gamal is that powerful and she's been manipulating the Keepers for centuries, why wait?
That's a great point.
Like, why didn't she just walk down into the library and destroy this failsafe 100 years ago? Why go through the elaborate charade of playing the translator?
That goes to the nature of Keeper magic. The Final Glyph isn't a physical document she can just set on fire. It's a massive, complex, magical construct.
Oh, okay.
To interact with it, let alone destroy it, she needed to systematically dismantle the magical immune system the ancient Keepers put in place.
So the system actively defends itself.
Precisely. She needed the interpreter, Caduca, to decipher the encrypted prophecies regarding the Final Glyph so Gamal could locate its vulnerabilities.
And the moment Caduca found what Gamal needed,
Gamal murdered her. Furthermore, she needed to manipulate the first Keeper, Orland, into focusing the enforcers on Garrett.
she needed a distraction.
She needed the entire Keeper Order distracted, weak, and looking the wrong way. If she had attacked the failsafe centuries ago, the Keepers of that era might have stopped her, or the failsafe might have activated defensively. She played a remarkably long game.
That is deeply chilling. It's like a parasite slowly shutting down the host's immune system, organ by organ, before finally going for the heart.
It really is.
And that puts Garrett in an impossible position. He is the only one who sees the board clearly now. The Keepers are bleeding out.
They're in total disarray.
So to stop Gamal, Garrett has to acquire the remaining ancient artifacts required to trigger the failsafe before Gamal can destroy them.
Right, because these artifacts are intrinsically linked to the Final Glyph. They're the keys to the system. Without them, the failsafe cannot be activated.
So the narrative shifts from a mystery into a high-stakes race. Which brings us to the Wieldstrom Museum.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
I want to spend some time here because the thematic weight of this location is just incredible. Think about Garrett's resume leading up to this night.
It's quite the list.
Over the course of his life, this guy has infiltrated haunted Hammerite cathedrals swarming with the undead. He has descended into the flooded subterranean ruins of the Lost City.
He sneaked through the reality-bending mansion of a literal pagan god.
He just survived a sentient asylum. And now, for the climax of his career, to save the city. Where does he go? A museum.
It serves as the ultimate poetic heist. The Wieldstrom Museum represents the city's attempt to categorize, display, and tame its own chaotic past.
It's the domestication of history.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. The artifacts inside are the physical manifestations of the city's magical legacy, stripped of their danger and placed behind glass for wealthy citizens to gawk at.
So Garrett, a creature of the undocumented margins, a man who lives entirely in the shadows, is forced to step into the brightly lit, heavily curated heart of the city's documented history.
And we shouldn't underestimate the challenge this presents. The security at the Wieldstrom Museum isn't just a couple of sleepy guards in a drafty castle.
No, it's state-of-the-art.
It's a pristine, controlled environment. There are no dark, forgotten corners to hide in. There are electric lights, advanced mechanical security systems, and highly trained patrols.
It's the ultimate test of pure, unadulterated thieving skill. It strips away all the supernatural horrors for a moment and asks a very simple question. Garrett, how good of a thief are you?
He needs to be flawless.
Mm-hmm.
The items he is targeting aren't ordinary valuables. You can fence for a few coins. They are the remaining pieces needed to construct the final glyph.
And he does it. He pulls off the heist of the century. The tension is incredibly high. The adrenaline is pumping. Garrett slips out of the museum, back into the foggy, dark streets, holding the artifacts that could save the world.
But the victory is instantly undercut.
Yes, because waiting for him in the shadows is his longtime keeper mentor, Artemus.
Artemus is a foundational pillar in Garrett's psychology. This is the man who found Garrett as a starving orphan on the streets.
Right, he was basically a father figure.
Artemus recognized the potential in a young pickpocket who managed to perceive a hidden keeper. He brought Garrett into the order, trained him, fed him.
Even though Garrett eventually rejected the keeper's dogma, Artemus remained this lingering tether.
He was always trying to guide Garrett back to his destiny.
Artemus was the embodiment of the prophecies for Garrett. So seeing him outside the museum calmly asking for the artifacts, it creates this false sense of security.
It feels like a return to the status quo.
Artemus is essentially saying, good job, Garrett. You played your part. Hand over the artifacts, and the adults and the keepers will handle it from here.
But Garrett's perception has been home to a razor's edge. Between his mechanical eye and his lifetime of survival instincts, he recognizes an anomaly.
Something's wrong.
The cadence of the voice, the posture, the subtle micro-expressions. Something is profoundly wrong.
It's not Artemis.
No, it is Gamal.
It is such a violating reveal. Gamal is standing there wearing Artemis's appearance. And based on what we know about the mechanics of how Gamal assumes a disguise...
It means she murdered him.
Yeah.
She had already slaughtered the first keeper, Orland, and stolen his skin to manipulate the enforcers. Now, she has done the same to Artemis.
It's just horrific.
She hunted down the man who was arguably the closest thing Garrett had to a father, killed him, stripped him of his skin, and wore it as a grotesque suit to trick Garrett.
Let's analyze how this impacts Garrett psychologically. Garrett has spent his entire life building emotional walls. He claims he doesn't care about the city's politics.
He insists he just wants to pay his rent.
Exactly. He claims no loyalty to the pagans, the Hammerites, or the keepers. But Gamal wearing Artemis's skin forces the issue. This is no longer a philosophical disagreement about balance. This is deeply, profoundly personal.
Gamal has weaponized his only real emotional attachment. She desecrated his past. This breaks Garrett's cultivated detachment.
With the artifacts secured and the illusion of Artemis shattered, Garrett realizes he can't just run away. He can't drop these items off at a fence and disappear.
He has to assemble the ultimate weapon left behind by the ancient founders of the city.
He has to activate the final glyph himself.
To fully grasp the magnitude of this ritual, we need to examine the nature of the artifacts he just stole. They're referred to in Keeper lore as the Sentients.
The Sentients, let's list them because each one carries immense historical weight for you to understand. We have the heart, the crown, the chalice, the paw, and the eye.
The term sentient is not metaphorical here. These are not merely magical batteries or symbolic keys. They were imbued with actual sentience by the ancient keepers.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm understanding the mechanics of this. You're saying these objects can think? They have consciousness?
To varying degrees, yes. The crown is the Kershuk crown, stolen from a subterranean civilization. The paw is the Jacknull's paw, a deeply sacred pagan artifact.
The chalice is revered by the Hammerites, right?
Yes, the builder's chalice. They all hold significant magical resonance. But the most crucial of them is the eye. The historical texts explicitly state that the eye is fully telepathic.
Telepathic? Wow.
It can communicate. It has agency. In fact, the activation of the final glyph cannot simply be forced. It must be initiated by the conscious will of the eye itself.
That opens up a really dark avenue in the lore. Giving an inanimate object sentience isn't something you achieve with a simple incantation. How did the ancient keepers actually build these things?
If we cross-reference the source material with the writings of Albrecht, we find deeply disturbing implications. Albrecht's texts suggest that creating the sentience, forging consciousness into metal and stone, required a profound, terrible sacrifice.
What kind of sacrifice? We're talking blood magic.
The text implies a sacrifice of blood, or perhaps the sacrifice of mortality itself. The working theory is that the ancient keepers who forged these items had to pour their own life force, their own souls, into the artifacts.
That changes how I view the ancient keepers entirely. That speaks to utter desperation.
As they were so terrified of their future successors becoming corrupt that they sacrificed their own humanity to create a failsafe that could think for itself.
So they engineered a system that would refuse to be misused because the keys were alive and could judge the intent of the user.
Exactly.
So let's unpack this failsafe. What is the final glyph? We see it referenced as the last of all glyphs. What is its actual function?
The final glyph is a massive, dormant, magical construct. When the ancient keepers first established their order and discovered how to harness primal energy, they recognized a fundamental truth about human nature.
That power inevitably corrupts.
Yes. They foresaw that, generations down the line, their successors would lose their objectivity. They would become arrogant, bureaucratic, and fall into imbalance.
Which is exactly what happened with First Keeper Orland and the Blind Council. The ancient keepers predicted their own institutional decay.
So they engineered a self-destruct sequence for their own magic. The final glyph is a fail-safe designed to completely erase all glyph magic from existence.
Just a hard reset on the city's magical ecosystem.
If the keepers ever became the threat to the city's balance, the final glyph would strip them of their power.
The scale of this ritual is what absolutely blows my mind. This is where the world building transcends standard fantasy tropes. Garrett doesn't just arrange these 5 sentients on a pedestal in a dark basement enchant.
No, the ritual requires him to place the 5 artifacts in specific historical landmarks across the city's oldest districts.
The urban geography of this is the most fascinating element of the entire record. Let's map it out for you. Garrett has to place the heart at the Bradshaw Monument in the Alldale district.
He has to take the crown and place it at the base of the massive clock tower in Stone Market.
The chalice goes to the Cataclysm Memorial in Fort Ironwood. The paw must be placed at the first landing marker down in the docks.
And finally, the eye has to be placed at the fountain in South Quarter.
When you plot these locations on a map and Garrett places the artifacts, the lines of the final glyph begin to glow.
And those magical lines correspond exactly to the layout of the city's streets, its major bridges, and the curve of the river.
I want you to really visualize the implication of this. The ancient keepers didn't just draw a glyph on a piece of parchment. They drew a glyph using urban zoning laws and masonry.
Over centuries.
Yes. Over centuries, they used their influence to manipulate city planners, architects, and politicians. They ensured that as the city grew, the roads and monuments were built in the exact shape of a giant citywide magical symbol.
The entire city is a literal circuit board.
And Garrett is running through the streets, physically plugging in the final components. It's architectural determinism.
It entirely recontextualizes the history of the city. It means the keepers weren't just passively observing from the shadows. They were the secret architects of physical reality.
Every time a merchant walked down a curved street in Stone Market, they were tracing the lines of a dormant, magical nuclear device.
The keepers embedded their fail-safe into the very stones of the world.
So Garrett is dodging Gamal statues, sneaking past the city watch, moving through these districts he's robbed 100 times before. He finally arrives at the South Quarter fountain.
He has placed the first 4 sentients.
He holds the eye, What happens the moment he plugs in that final component?
When Garrett places the eye into the fountain, the final glyph is fully realized. It activates. And the visual description of this event in the sources is apocalyptic.
The glyph lines just ignite, right?
Yes. A massive, blinding explosion of light erupts from the streets themselves, visible across the entire skyline. It is a flash of raw, unfiltered primal energy being released all at once.
And the fallout is immediate. This isn't a subtle political shift. This is a catastrophic, extinction-level event for the Keeper Order's magic.
The first consequence is the total erasure of the magic itself.
Wow.
Every single Keeper glyph in the city is completely destroyed.
The glyphs hiding their secret doors vanish.
The glyphs holding ancient texts together dissolve. The magic granting them supernatural perception is wiped from existence.
The ink literally vanishes from the Keeper's prophetic books, leaving the pages completely blank. The Unwritten Times begin in a flash of light. The prophecies are instantly voided.
And this has a devastating immediate effect on Gamal.
Right, because Gamal's entire existence was reliant on glyph magic to sustain her stolen skins and her unnatural age. With the glyphs erased, the foundation of her immortality is instantly ripped away.
The monstrous hag who had lived for centuries doesn't die in some massive, glorious sword fight.
No, she is simply reduced to a frail, powerless, incredibly old woman. She is defeated by systemic erasure.
It is a profoundly fitting conclusion for her character. She sought ultimate authority over the magic, and she was defeated by the magic rejecting her.
But we also have to analyze what this means for the Keeper Order as an institution.
The explosion of the final glyph dissolves the ancient order in a matter of seconds. The Keepers, who had ruled the city from the shadows like untouchable gods, are instantly reduced to ordinary citizens.
Think about the panic. All their magically hidden doors, the secret entrances in the alleys and the sewers, they just become visible to the general public.
The Keeper compound is suddenly just a regular building sitting on a street. The ultimate secret society is fully exposed to the daylight.
They are completely stripped of their authority. Without their prophecies to guide them, without their glyphs to hide them, they are just a group of confused scholars sitting in a suddenly very visible library.
They've been humbled in the most absolute, humiliating way imaginable.
So after this massive, world-altering explosion of light, after the magic is wiped away and the most powerful people in the world are reduced to nothing, the dust settles.
And the narrative leaves us with a quiet, deeply personal moment on the streets of the newly changed city.
Which brings us to what is arguably one of the most brilliant, poetic, narrative conclusions we've ever analyzed in these archives. We find Garrett walking alone through the mundane, dark streets.
The magical light show is over. The city is just a city again, grimy, industrial, and quiet.
Garrett is finally free. I mean, think about his entire adult life. He has been hounded by the Keepers. They manipulated him into fighting the Trickster. They manipulated him into fighting Karas. They manipulated him into fighting Gamal.
But now the books are empty. The prophecies are gone.
No one is pulling his strings anymore. He is just a man walking in the shadows. But then as he's walking, a young street girl sneaks up behind him.
She is grimy, clearly an orphan, just trying to survive the harsh reality of the city.
She reaches out to attempt to pickpocket him, and Garrett, without even looking back, without breaking his stride, flawlessly catches her by the wrist.
The girl struggles.
Yeah.
She panics. She asks him to let her go.
And if you have been paying attention to Garrett's story since the very beginning, this moment makes your jaw hit the floor. Because we have seen this exact scene before.
It perfectly, exactly mirrors the defining moment of Garrett's childhood. Decades ago, Garrett was a starving orphan on these exact same streets.
He tried to pickpocket a man who he thought was just a wealthy citizen.
But that man was Keeper Artemus. Artemus caught young Garrett by the wrist, recognizing that Garrett possessed the rare ability to perceive a hidden keeper.
It is a complete cyclical mirror. Garrett is now standing in the exact position Artemus stood in all those years ago. And what Garrett says next seals it.
He looks at the struggling girl, and he speaks the exact same words to her that Artemus once spoke to him.
He says, "It's not an easy thing to see a keeper, especially one who does not wish to be seen."
The delivery of that line is monumental, because as he speaks, the perspective shifts to Garrett's hand, still holding the girl's wrist.
And we see that the activation of the final glyph left a permanent mark on him.
Burned into the back of his hand is the symbol of a keyhole.
The symbol of the Keepers.
Precisely. If we analyze the narrative brilliance of this, for his entire life, Garrett has vehemently rejected the Keepers.
He constantly told them he wanted out. He claimed he just wanted to steal, fence his goods, and survive.
He despised their bureaucracy and their manipulation. But in the end, by taking it upon himself to destroy the corrupt order to save the city, he has achieved something profound.
He became what they were supposed to be.
He reluctantly, but fully, accepted his destiny as the one true keeper. By erasing the corrupt institution, he embodied its true original purpose.
He is no longer just a cynical thief looking for a payday. He is the mentor now. He is the guardian of the new age.
He will train this girl, just as Artemis trained him, but he will do it without the crutch of magical prophecies. He will rely on raw skill and genuine observation.
But I have to push back on this because I think this presents a massive philosophical paradox for you to think about. Is this actually a happy ending for Garrett, or is it a deeply tragic one?
It's a tough question.
Think about it. He fought his entire life for his free will. He despised being a pawn in their prophecies. Did he truly break free of the prophecies when he destroyed the glyphs, or did the prophecy force him into exactly the role it wanted all along?
That is the ultimate philosophical tension of his story. The Keeper's oldest prophecies stated that the one true Keeper would eventually activate the Final Glyph.
So by fighting against the Keeper's corruption, by acting out of rebellion and personal vengeance for Artemis, Garrett inadvertently fulfilled their most sacred text.
You could argue that he never had free will at all. Every act of defiance just pushed him further down the path destiny had laid out for him.
Exactly. It's the ultimate trap. He rebelled so hard he ended up exactly where they predicted.
That's one way to look at it, but consider the alternative perspective. You could argue that by destroying the magic that enforced that destiny, he claimed his free will in the aftermath.
How so?
The keyhole scar isn't a magical binding forcing him to act. It's a reminder of the burden he consciously chose to carry when no one else could.
I see.
He is a keeper, not because a book told him to be, but because he recognizes the city needs balance, and he is the only one qualified to maintain it. He chose to catch that girl's wrist.
It's heavy. It's a brilliant way to leave you questioning everything you've just witnessed. And it perfectly wraps up this monumental arc. Let's look back at the grand journey you've been on with us through these deep dives.
Garrett's life is basically a masterclass in dealing with extremes. We can view this entire historical epoch as a Hegelian dialectic.
In the first Dark Age, Garrett was forced to stop the trickster. The trickster represented the extreme of chaos and raw, untamed nature.
He wanted to pull the city back into a primal, brutal, unthinking forest. Garrett acted as the agent of order to stop him.
Right, and then, in the second Dark Age, the pendulum swung wildly in the exact opposite direction. Garrett had to stop Karis in the Metal Age.
Karis represented the extreme of order and industry. He wanted to replace all organic life with sterile clockwork machines.
So Garrett acted as the agent of chaos, allying with the pagans to sabotage the machines.
And finally, in the third Dark Age, the threat wasn't order or chaos. The threat was the Balancers themselves.
The Keepers had become stagnant and corrupt. By dismantling the Keepers, Garrett neutralized the final extreme.
He has single-handedly balanced the city, not by ruling it, not by destroying it, but by removing the forces that sought to control it completely.
The trickster is gone, the Metal Age is rusted, and the Keepers are no more. Garrett finally balanced the scales by breaking them.
But that leaves us with something really deep to chew on as we wrap this up.
Because, yes, the oppressive Watchers are gone, the corrupt magic is erased. But we know from the lore that the raw, mysterious, primal energy of the city, the lifeblood that the Keepers use to power their glyphs, is still there.
It's no longer contained, managed, or siphoned by anyone. The safety nets have been removed. The training wheels are off.
The city is entering the Unwritten Times, a future that is entirely blank and unmanaged. So I ask you, in a world without secret watchers, without prophecies to guide the way, and without magical failsafes to hit the reset button if things go wrong, who protects humanity from itself?
Is the absolute freedom of an unwritten future worth the terrifying chaos that comes with it?
When the foundations of paper finally burn away, do we learn to stand on our own, or do we just fall?
It's a question every society eventually has to answer for itself.
Until next time, watch your step, stay out of the light, and remember, the archives never close.